all that was going through my mind is people are going to remember you forever as the Birmingham fan that missed if you missed this. If you missed this, they're going to remember you forever as you missed it. And that was all that was going through my mind. I went completely about it the wrong way, the way I left Sheffield United, and it's probably the only regret I've got in 15 years. And I just always felt he didn't rate me. When he was offering me contracts, he was offering me terrible contract for near enough the same money that was on coming from Notts County. So I said to him, right, I want the same contract that Paul Furlong's on. The good thing about Baz, the three best man managers I played for were Baz, Steve Bruce, Neil Warnock, without a doubt. And they all had great coaches with them, but they made you want to play for them because they were good blokes, they were honest blokes, they were the type of people that you could have a stand-up row with, a real shouting match and call each other for everything.
Paul Devlin, welcome to the podcast. My first question is, how did your career start? What was your upbringing like?
At school, senior school, it was the years of industrial action from the teachers. So we didn't actually have a school football team for 3 out of the 5 years I was at senior school. Had no sort of ambitions to become a footballer. You know, didn't think I was good enough. Hadn't had trials anywhere. Blah blah blah, and was actually wanted to be a chef when I left school. So for the first sort of 18 months after I left school, I got an apprenticeship with a company that's gone now called Trust House Forte, one of their hotels, training to be a chef. I sort of drifted back into football. A mate of mine at one of the local social clubs, St Mary's and John Celtic, old Joe Brennan, God bless him, he started a football team and loads of lads from the Erdington area started playing for him. So I signed up, but obviously being in the catering industry, evenings and weekends was difficult. So I was sub most of the time. And we got to a cup final in Tamworth, and I came on for 20 minutes and we won the cup, and I played okay. And there was a scout there from Tamworth's youth team called Paul Wood, who I still speak to now and again. Wood, he's been working for the Villa for the last 20 odd years, and Paul Wood and Clove Lyons. And they asked me to go and play for Tamworth youth team. I was just turned 17, probably 17 and a half at the time. And there was a Wednesday night league, and really all sort of snowballed from there. So I went, played for the youth team, just took off really well, managed to get into the, couple of games in the first team. Tamworth had a good, strong non-league team then. Played for a couple of non-league teams. Went to Stafford Rangers under Chrissy Wright and Brian Kenning in the Vauxhall Conference. Had sort of a year, 15 months there. And then I went for trials at Oxford, Derby, Leeds. Liverpool had me up there for about 6 weeks on and off. Played in a reserve game for Ian Rush and scored the winning goal. That's still one of my claims to fame down at the Albion. And eventually signed for Notts County in the old First Division, and made my debut in the old First Division against Coventry City in 1992, I think that was. But yeah, so it went from me not having any, I wouldn't say no interest in football. I always loved football, but obviously never thought it was good enough. And then the job and that I couldn't play. So I went from at 17 being a sub on the local Sunday League team, and at 19 making my debut in the top flight of English football. So it was just I got my foot on the ladder and I sort of climbed the non-league ladder. And it went from there, really.
How do you keep that persistence then, Paul? You mentioned working in the catering industry, and then having an opportunity to play non-league and play with your friends, I presume, and the community that you were within. How do you keep that persistence to play football and then eventually play in the Premier League?
Well, I got to a stage where I was actually earning a few quid. I was getting paid for playing, and then it sort of clicked on me. Hang on, you've got a chance here. It wasn't at the time where it's like now, where if you're not in an academy by 8, you're never going to make it. But that's another story. So yeah, I realised I've got a chance, and people were telling me. People got a challenge. Were telling me if you screw your head a little bit here, if you put a bit of dedication in, you've got a chance of going pro. And then obviously, I heard there were scouts down watching, and you hear all that, and then that just boosts you on even more. And then, I've always had quite a steely determination. There was loads of naysayers in the local pub and all that. Oh, he's not going to do this. So you want to prove them wrong as well. So yeah, it was just one of those things. Once I realised I could earn a few quid at it, I took it seriously, to be honest.
And on that, obviously you mentioned kind of the academy system. You did not kind of enter academy system. You entered football late. Do you feel like that made you a better footballer? Yeah.
100%, 100%. I look at the kids today, not all of them, and I think at 17, 18, I was playing against men in good standard non-league. At 18, I was playing with the European Cup winner, Desi Bremner, 18 for Stafford Rangers. There's a massive difference between a 21-year-old playing against another 21-year-old than a 21-year-old playing against a 33-year-old centre half who's been around the block, who's going to leave a bit on you, who's going to elbow you. You have to grow up quick. And I think soft generation's probably a little bit too harsh a word. But I don't think all these lower age groups, the under 23s, the under 21s, I don't think it prepares players to go and play for the first team. I really don't. And I'm so glad that I didn't come through the academy system, because I think we've got kids far too young. They're playing far too much football. And I think if you look at the percentages, I would hazard a guess that the percentage isn't that much higher than 30 years ago, when you had one youth team and you signed the best two players out of that. Most of these academies still take great pleasure and say, 99 out of 100 don't make it, which I suppose is true. But if you look at the amount of teams in academies now and the amount of money being spent on academies, I think it's a massive failure. We're not letting kids enjoy the football. Through school we didn't have many teams, but I enjoyed playing on a Sunday with my mates. I love non-league. I went back to non-league after 15 years as a pro. And I think a lot of these kids miss out on it. And then I see kids that have been in academies from 8 till 15 get released, and they think, "Sorry, I've had enough of football now." Yeah. So I'm not a massive fan of the academy setup at the minute. Listen, you're always going to get your exceptions, your Jude Bellinghams and people like that, which obviously sell for 30 million and go for 150 million, and then they can justify having the academy. But your Bellinghams, your Rooneys, they're generational talents. They come along every 10, 20 years, don't they? So I was glad I did it the way I did it.
I think also, to add to that, it's kind of the element of, within your case, you could maybe socialise with friends and enjoy it intrinsically, rather than have the pressures of trying to compete for a contract at academy level, and everyone knows you as the player within the academy, and identity kind of is involved there. I suppose you were a little bit more free to play.
Listen, I mean, you just mentioned something there, the social side of it. I'm a very social person with the lads, and I loved it. I love non-learn. I love having a beer after. I love having a crack. So that was one of the main things that I enjoyed throughout my career, my pro career as well. Obviously as the game progressed, that sort of going out for a beer got less and less, really. Yeah. But I love that side of it, the socialising side of it, and that aspect was great for me.
So what was the drive then? Obviously, you mentioned Stafford Rangers and then getting the opportunity to go to Notts County. What was kind of the process there, Paul? What was the feeling like in terms of you, like, mentally and kind of preparing yourself to go into these environments?
Well, it was a strange one, because Liverpool had me up on trial. We played Liverpool in a pre-season friendly when Graham Souness had just taken over, and I played quite well. So after the game, Chris Wright's come up to me, says, "I've just spoke to Ron Yates, who was chief scout at Liverpool at the time. They want you up on trial." I think, "Bloody hell, sub on a Sunday 9 months ago, I'm going up to train with Liverpool." So initially they said, "Come up and train for a week." So I went up for a week, and then went to Melwood, trained with them. I think my first five-a-side, my team was Mike Cooper, myself, Graham Souness, Jan Molby and Ronnie Rosenthal. Wow. So you can imagine me, a kid from Erdington who's been playing for St Mary's and John Celtic 5 minutes ago. All of a sudden I'm training with these legends. So I did quite well. Played a reserve game against Sheffield Wednesday, did well, and they asked me back. So they ended up asking me back for about 6 weeks. And then I played in another reserve game with Ian Rush at the Albion. He was coming back from injury. There was about 7,000 people there to watch him. Won 1-0, scored the goal. Did really well. And then all of a sudden it just sort of fell by the wayside. But I since came to learn that Stafford Rangers had sold Stan Collymore the year before for 100 grand to Crystal Palace. And that was the record ever for a non-league teenager. I believe Liverpool were willing to take a punt on me and spend 10, 20 grand, as a bit of a gamble. And Stafford Rangers were asking 150, 200 grand. So it sort of scuppered the move, really. Yeah. And you can see their logic. They'd sold Collymore to Palace for 100 grand. But, so that all fell through. Then I went to Leeds, went up on trial at Leeds, did really well there. But I got to be honest, didn't like the place. I didn't sort of take to Howard Wilkinson. And I came, Notts County, Neil Warnock had been on the phone to me, and I'd been down there on and off. So I had 2 weeks up at Leeds, and I came back on the Friday. And I never forget Howard Wilkins saying to me, "Come back, make sure you're back on Monday." Came back on the Friday, made my mind up, spoke to Neil Warnock, and went and signed for Notts County in the old First Division. I was still living at home at the time. And then I remember on the Monday when I didn't show at Leeds, Howard Wilkinson actually rang me and gave me a rollicking down the phone. But I like Nottingham. I loved Neil Warnock, and I just thought that was a better place for me. As it went on that season, Leeds won the league. Notts County got relegated. But, Leeds had a fantastic team. Gary Speed, God rest him, David Batty, Gary McAllister. I might have gone to Leeds and never kicked a ball in the first team. I don't know. I ended up having 150 games, 4 years at Notts County, predominantly in the Championship, and I couldn't have wished for better people and a better club to start at. So I think overall it was probably the right decision for me.
Mm-hmm. What was you mentioned the trials? What was the process like in terms of like work? Were you kind of in and out of work during that period? Were you kind of working part time? Yeah.
The couple of years where I sort of started taking it seriously and I was playing non-league, what tended to happen at the time, the chairman of a non-league club normally had a business. So if you signed for him, he'd give you a little job that would fit in. I'd done labouring, roofing, all sort of manual stuff because I signed for their team. So I was lucky, really. I did a few jobs where the chairman of the various non-league clubs I was playing for, whether it would be Armitage 90, Stafford, they gave me a bit of work and it tied in with the football. I was earning a few quid from football. So I did it that way.
Did that kind of entail within your mindset making your debut at Notts County? Were you with the thought? What's the thought process that I need to kind of stamp my authority? I need to kind of make this as a career.
Yeah, well,
just because of maybe experiences that you've had growing up, etc.
Again, it was an eye opener because I made my debut against Coventry, and at the time, Coventry's left back was Kenny Sampson, who at that time was 36. I was 19, but he was England's most capped ever fullback at that time. He got 86 caps for England. So I'm 19, full of bravado. I could run all day. I was quick. I was aggressive. 36-year-old on my debut. I'm going to absolutely... Never had a kick against him. He was too good, too clever. And I always remember it was the end of the season. I think I made my debut. It was the last 3 games I was involved against Luton, Coventry, and someone else. And it was roasted. And I just remember thinking, wow, it is all about levels. And I played against Kenny Sampson, and he was just pure quality. Everything I tried, just he knew what was happening, just took the ball off me. So again, that was something where I realised, hang on, I've got to start learning again here, and I've got to rethink my attitude and how I'm going to play.
What was the best career advice you ever had, Paul, just on that, in terms of maybe reframing the way that you train, the way that you become a professional? Was anything that stands out?
I mean, I took loads from... I mean, you take loads from wherever you go, whether it's older players, younger players. There isn't one piece about how to play or my career that really sticks out in my mind. You just take snippets from everyone. I was a big believer in just making the most of what I had. I wasn't the most skillful player in the world. I knew that. I didn't, I was a winger. I didn't really have a trick or anything like that. I was quite quick. I was quite aggressive. My mindset was if I was having a bad game, I was going to ruin it for someone else. Do you know what I mean? I'm not playing well today. I'm going to ruin it for the opposition. So I always really just concentrated on, I could nick a goal. I had a good goal scoring record for a winger. I could play down the middle now and again. So it was always a case of, right, just maximise what I'm really good at, really.
Going into obviously Notts County, and you mentioned relegation and a new environment and a professional environment and Neil Warnock. Was there anything that kind of stands out within that experience that that led you to your longevity within your playing career? Was there kind of some lessons learnt within that process early on?
I thought Neil was brilliant. He was a fantastic man manager. Obviously, not so much on the coaching side. He always had good coaches with him. I was fortunate I had a couple of spells with Neil. I had a spell with him again at Sheffield United, sort of 10, 15 years down the line, whatever, 10, 12 years down the line. And it was just his, we built this siege mentality and everybody hates us, but we're going to show them, blah, blah, blah. So, I think obviously we did get relegated with Neil, at the First Division, and as it was then. Nobody wants to go through that, and it's horrible. It's horrible for the club. It's horrible around the place. It's bad for your ego, and it was just one of them things. I never want to go through this again. And I think actually I did get relegated again with Notts County at one stage, but I think it just toughens you up. For me to come in my first season, I've played at the top flight. I've played against England's most capped fullback at the time. We've been relegated. Then Neil got the sack. So in those first sort of initial 6 months at Notts County, I went through a big learning curve. And I think, again, doing that so early stood me in good stead for, the rest of my career.
So obviously that transition from county to Birmingham, talk to me a little bit about that. And also as well, from your personal point of view, being a Brummie and growing up in Birmingham, did you feel like a little bit of pressure from maybe family and friends, etc., to perform at Birmingham?
Yeah, it was brilliant because myself, Michael Johnson, and Andy Legg shared a house in Nottingham, and we were all really, really pally. So you can imagine, can't you? But Steve Thompson had taken over Notts County, and he sort of not fell out with Jono, but Jono was out the team. So Jono ended up going to Blues. Obviously, I used to go down and watch the Blues. My uncle used to take me down to Blues, supported the Blues. Obviously, the old man's a Celtic fan, so I was always like Celtic and Blues, but used to go down and watch quite regular. And then Leggy was out the team, and there was one night I was playing in the reserves, but I knew Barry Fry was interested. So Baz had come down to talk to Steve Thompson and Colin Murphy about signing me, and they were watching the reserve game. And if you remember Andy Legg, great left winger, great left foot up and down, but he had the most ridiculous long throwing you've ever seen. I think he was in the Guinness Book of Records at one time. Okay. So as Baz is watching the game, they're going, Blues had Kevin Francis at the time, who was 6'8", massive. So he said, "Well, I want Leggy and Devlin." So we signed us both in a joint deal, which was great. And to get the chance to go to Blues, which was, my uncle supported them. I used to go down and watch them. Was absolutely fantastic. And Barry Fry again, one of the game's characters. So it was brilliant to go and get the chance to play for the team that I'd been down on the terraces watching. Fantastic.
How does it work in terms of transfers? Do you have to maybe suggest that you want to move on, or do you just get told that you want to move on? I'm intrigued on that.
Yeah, you used to have to put a letter in, transfer request. You used to have to do it officially. The reason why they'd want it officially, if you had time left on your contract, if you put a transfer request in, they didn't have to pay you up before contract. If they wanted to sell you and you had a contract, they had to pay you up. But I think I had, if I remember rightly, I think I had put a transfer. I can't remember, to be honest, because I knew that Blues were interested and Notts County didn't really want to sell me. I know there was a bit of hoo-ha about the fee because Stafford Rangers and the club before I went to, Stafford Rangers, Armitage 90, they had a sell-on clause. Oh, okay. So I think they valued myself and Leggy at 500 grand, but officially they valued me at something like 10 grand and Leggy at 490, which was a bit naughty. So I think there was a bit of a steward's inquiry about that with the league somewhere down the line. But yeah, and that was it. It was pretty smooth. Obviously, Notts County got a few. It was a shame because we had a really good team at Notts County in the season before. We just missed out on the playoffs by 1 point. We scored an own goal at the baseball ground to draw 1-1, and we lost out in the playoffs. And then they broke that team up. Mark Draper, Jono, Chris Short, myself, and we had Gary McSwegan, who's probably still the best finisher I ever played with. And they sort of fell away then, Notts County, and it's been a gradual decline ever since. It's great to see them back in the league, but yeah. So, like I say, that's how it comes about. You listen. You always get a phone call from one of the lads. Oh, the gaffer's interested in you. Do you fancy it? What they're paying? Where is it? Blah, blah, what's he like? So you ask all those questions. So it always starts, and any pro that tells you different is lying. It always starts with you being tapped up from one of your pals or an agent or someone like that. You get a phone call, do you fancy it? And obviously, once I knew it was Blues, I jumped at the chance.
Would that be common in the modern game as well,
Yeah, of
Paul?
course it would. When all these lads, especially when you're away on international duty, the gaffer fancies you. What do you reckon? Would you fancy it? Blah, blah, blah. You'll get a phone call from your mate who's at another club all the time. And anyone that gives you the old line, no, it's lying. It's like when they say a manager never tells you to go out and hurt another player. They don't tell you to go out and break someone's leg. But if you can win the ball, get him out the game, do it. But again, most pros will realize, oh no, I was never told to do that. It's all, you got to take all the pinches, especially when you play to someone like Neil Warnock.
And Barry Fry as well. What was he like as a manager? A bit Brilliant. Of a maverick as a manager, yeah?
Yeah, he's one of the game's characters. Still speak to Baz now and again. Absolutely fantastic. Again, fantastic man manager. Didn't do
in what sense? In what sense, Paul?
He knew the players. He knew the players he had to roast and tell off and shout at, and he knew the players that he had to put his arm around and tell them how good he was. The good thing about Baz, the three best man managers I played for were Baz, Steve Bruce, Neil Warnock, without a doubt, and they all had great coaches with them. but they made you want to play for them because they were good blokes, they were honest blokes, they were the type of people that you could have a stand-up row with, a real shouting match and call each other for everything, but it's forgotten about. The next day it's forgotten about. It's water under the bridge. Men's men, I'd call them, and I know it's probably not the PC thing to say in today's day and age, but that's why I responded to them, and I didn't want to let them down. So that, in my opinion, for me personally, that's why I thought they were great man managers. That motivated you, and you wanted to do well for them.
What was the difference between Barry Fry and Trevor Francis then? Because obviously that change happened during your spell at Birmingham. What was that like in terms of maybe
it was
man management, etc.?
It was a shame because Trevor had done really well under Baz. I think Baz had the last 12, 15 games of the season, and I'd came in from Notts County, scored 8 goals, flying, absolutely flying. And then, unfortunately, Baz went. Trevor comes in now. Obviously, you'll know being a Brummie, Trevor is held up as Blue. He's God at Blues, best ever player, bar none, fantastic player, amazing career. And I thought, oh, brilliant! You know, we've got our best ever. It's like God coming to manage the club. So he came in. They spent a few quid, bought in Steve Bruce, Gary Ablett, Barry Horn, Paul Furlong, Mike Newell. Thinking, God, you're getting the captain of Man U, league winner Mike Newell, record signing Paul Furlong from Chelsea, Gary Ablett, Liverpool, Barry Horn, captain of Wales. Fantastic, and they were all good lads, real good lads. And it was a brilliant time to be there. Now, we got most of Baz's players sort of went by the wayside, but because I'd only been there a couple of months, probably 4 months, I ended up, staying. Trevor's first game, never forget it, Crystal Palace at home. It was about 104 degrees on the pitch. And some of the blonde-headed lads, Paul Tate and Andy Legg, there to bring them off because it was that hot. 1-1 scored the goal. So got off to an absolute flyer under Trevor. That season, 19 goals, player of the year, top goal scorer, all that. But I always felt he didn't really fancy me as a player. Every chance he got to leave me out, he left me out the team. And I was coming into the last year of my contract in the second year, and I'd scored 7 or 8 in the first 12 games again. And he just kept leaving me out. But he couldn't have any confrontation, Trevor. He'd always get someone else to tell you if there was any bad news. And I just always felt he didn't rate me. When he was offering me contracts, he was offering me terrible contracts. For near enough the same money that was on coming from Notts County. So I said to him, right, I want the same contract that Paul Furlong's on. Yeah, but we've bought Paul Furlong from Chelsea in record. I went, yeah, but he's here now. He's not at Chelsea, he's at Blues. And I'm doing better. I'm doing better. And I know there was interest from a couple of clubs, Ipswich, Middlesbrough. I remember Steve Bruce in the car. He used to give Bruce a lift back to the train station. And I remember Brian Robson, he's been ringing him in the car. And again, like the same, talking about going to Middlesbrough. But in the end, I ended up falling out with Trevor. Always got the impression he didn't really fancy me. I didn't like his style of management. And in the end, I was out the team. And they let me go for like 250 grand to Sheffield United when I know Ipswich, Middlesbrough, and there was 1 or 2 other teams. At the time where I was flying and doing well, they were talking about $1 million, $1.5 million, which in the late 90s, mid-late 90s was a lot of money. So yeah, I just never really struck it off from that minute one really with Trevor. Although, ironically, I probably played some of my best football in that sort of 18 months I worked with him. But he had a fantastic coach, Frank Barlow. Frank Barlow was brilliant. And he was sort of the buffer zone between the lads and Trevor and this. But I mean, listen, that was an argument I was never going to win. How do you win an argument with God? Which is what he is at Blues. So it was unfortunate. I wanted to have a 9-10 year unbroken spell there, get 100 goals for the club, which I think I would have done. But it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, it's interesting on your point, really, because you've gone from Barry Fry, who's quite charismatic, man management, and then obviously Trevor Francis comes in, and you mentioned the word God, but I can imagine ego and everything kind of comes involved within his leadership and management, and that obviously has an impact on your relationship with him in terms of trying to prove a point.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, he used to join in training. He was still the best player in training. Trevor, I think he'd have been 50 odd at the time. But yeah, I mean, there was still a culture around the place then, and around the game in general, of having a few beers, a few pints, and all that. I had a couple of drinking partners at the club, Paul Tate in particular, and Trevor frowned on all that side of it. And yeah, I don't think I was his cup of tea as a person. I think the fact that I wasn't one of his big signings, I mean, they were big signings for the club, the 5 lads I mentioned, and that I was
Yeah.
doing so well. I think that played a factor in it as well, because apart from myself and I think Martin Granger, there wasn't many of Barry's lads that sort of made the cut with him. So I think there was a bit of not resentment, but I think he didn't really like that, because I'm thinking, hang on, I brought in Mike Newell, Paul Furlong to score all the goals, and one of Barry Fry's signings is still doing it. So I think that played a part as well.
Yeah.
There was things put out in the press that I was being greedy. I was asking for this, asking for that. I asked for exactly the same deal as Paul Furlong, and not a penny more. Because at the
Yeah.
time, Furs was meant to be the main forward. Struggled a bit with injuries, and I was doing better. Furs was a great lad, absolutely fantastic lad. So I'm not criticising him in any way, shape, or form, and had a brilliant career. I just thought at the time, I was top scorers, player of the year. I was playing really well, that I deserved more than what Trevor was offering. And I think sort of his thinking was, well, if I keep offering him these really low offers, he's going to blow up, and then I could put something in the press and blah, blah, blah. I think it was all engineered to get me out,
Yeah.
which he knew me, obviously, because my character, I was always going to blow up at some stage. It was unfortunate. I've since, made my peace with Trevor down the years. It was very raw for a long time, especially when I used to go back with Sheffield United, and I'd have the whole of St Andrews singing Devlin is a, and there's only one greedy, blah, blah, blah. So it was very, very, very raw, but, it's all in the past now. It was just an unfortunate time, really.
Yeah. Obviously, that transfer to Sheffield United. One thing that I'm intrigued on, especially with footballers, is that people, again, as football fans, I think people tend to forget the element of moving and relocating and
Yeah.
transfers and contracts. Did that ever impact you in terms of going, obviously, to Notts County, then back to Birmingham, and then you're thinking, okay, I can settle here potentially because I'm from the area, and then all of a sudden you have to kind of move to Yorkshire. I'm
Yeah.
kind of interested on that journey and how that impacted you in terms of maybe
Well,
mentally, if it did it all.
I was very lucky, because being based in Birmingham, being central, I didn't have to move to Sheffield. The only time I had to move in my career was right at the end, Watford, where I lived down in Watford for 3 years. But I was really fortunate. I did live in Sheffield for about the first 12 months of my career. But then I moved back because we had David Kelly, Paul Pesci-Salido, Peter Unlove, who else? Ian Hamilton. So we always had 3 or 4 Birmingham-based players who we could travel up with. So you'd only have to drive once or twice a week. But yeah, it is, especially when you got young kids. It's difficult because you're moving away. You've got no support network there. So yeah, it's difficult. I found moving down south really difficult, if I'm being honest with you. And we were always, coming back every chance we got. We kept a house on up there. So yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. 'Cause again, if your kids are of school age, they've got to really, they've got to settle in at school. If they don't settle in, obviously, if your missus is working, she's then got to leave a job. And my missus was a teacher, so she's then got to leave and go somewhere else. So it's a difficult one. I speak to a mate of mine, David Kelly. I think David Kelly had 12, 14 clubs, so he was all over the place. And I don't think
Yeah.
he stopped anywhere for any longer than 2 years. So I was fortunate in that respect.
I think just on that, I think again from a football fan perspective is that people tend to forget that element of the game just because you see these signings from Europe and integration and culture. Obviously, from your perspective, you're quite lucky being an English lad, but I can imagine that being a challenge for footballers to perform if they're coming into a new environment, settle in. You mentioned the kids and your wife and their career and everything else that kind of is associated with that. It can be a challenge, can't it? I presume.
Yeah, and obviously with the lads coming from abroad, you got the language barrier. But it's
Yeah,
amazing.
that as
I've played
well.
with I've
Yeah.
played with lads at one club and they can't speak a word of English, and then 2 years down the line you've gone somewhere else and they speak perfect English. So they integrate a lot better over here than we do over there, I'd say. But yeah, it is a major part of it. But I think it's even harder because when people say footballers, everyone thinks Premier League, multi-millionaires. You're earning that money. It is a lot easier. But there's lads in the second and first division that are earning less money than some well-paid jobs out there that are having to do that as well. But people never see that. People's perception in the mind is straight away 50
Yeah.
grand a week. There's lads playing in the second and first division on like a few £100 a week, and they're living sort of month to month the same way a lot of people are at the moment. And it's even more difficult at that level. And they might have to go from Torquay to Carlisle or, places like that. So it is part of the game, that can be difficult. And I think obviously certain players adapt to it better than others.
So obviously, going to Sheffield United and you eventually rejoined Neil Warnock. Was there any differences in terms of maybe leadership and management from your previous time? Is there anything that stands out there?
He'd calmed down a bit. He was still wild, but he was probably wild 7 out of 10 on the scale than 10 out of 10. But no, he'd sort of aged a little bit. He wasn't quite as incendiary as he was at Notts County. But no, he was still the same Neil Warnock, and it was great. I think I scored in his first game as well. But first year there, Neil, I won Player of the Year in 2000. I think that was, so done really well. He came into the club after a difficult period. I signed there just after the Howard Kendall era, where they threw a lot of money at it. They hadn't quite made it to go up, and then that had a few managers. It was Steve Thompson, who was the manager that sold me from Notts County to Blues, who brought me back there. I mean, and at the time they had some names there. I mean, Paul McGrath was there, Dean Saunders was there, Ian Rush was there, Michael Vonk was there. So they had a lot of big hitters. They had to get them all off the wage bill. So it was a very big rebuilding scheme at the time at Sheffield. So obviously struggled that first season. Then I'll tell a lie. The first season we got to the playoffs. We lost to Sunderland in the playoffs. Sheffield United got to the semi-final of the FA Cup against Newcastle at Old Trafford, got knocked out. And then Steve unfortunately lost his job at the end of that season because he'd gone in as caretaker. And then that's when the rebuilding job started. They got rid of all the players. And we struggled for a year or two after that. And, we had a couple of different managers, Adrian Heath, Russell Slade. And then obviously Neil came in, done what he'd done, stabilised the club. And then obviously went from there, And that's another thing about the FA Cup game. I hadn't played in the FA Cup for Birmingham. I hadn't played at all. I was out the team. And just as the move to Sheffield United was coming round, Trevor put me in the squad for an FA Cup game. Right, and I'd been out the squad for I don't know how long. I hadn't played or anything. Knew the Sheffield United move was coming about. Put me on for 7 minutes in an FA Cup game, which means I was cup tied for the semi-final at Old Trafford. So I could, and I still to this day maintain he'd done that on purpose, so I couldn't play in the semi-final. And that's more paranoia about the whole thing. But yeah, it was fantastic club, Sheffield United, really, really good club. I'm so pleased they've had the success they've had over the last few years. Very similar to Birmingham, really. Great fan base, great supporters. Had lived in the other team in the city's shadow for a long time. So there was a couple of lads there that I knew, Sean Derry, Chris Shaw. It was an easy place to integrate.
Did you find with Neil Warnock being a local lad, there was that element of passion and enthusiasm to try and do something at Sheffield United? Obviously, if you're a local lad, and you might relate this to yourself playing for Birmingham as well, is that you want to try and maybe sustain some form of success or some form of role within. You mentioned kind of cup runs or league runs. Did you feel that within
very
this
much so.
period there?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Neil was a very passionate man. Wherever he was, I dare say, I had a couple of clubs with him. But you could tell even more so. He's a Sheffield man. He's a Sheffield United supporter. So I think it did, it was very, very close to his heart. I think if you ask him, it was his dream job to get that job there. So, yeah, you knew that as well as from professional pride, it meant something to him to be managing Sheffield United. And you felt that. You always felt that.
Just on your experience, obviously you mentioned Trevor Francis and kind of the commotion that happened there in terms of that transfer. Did you feel going into Sheffield United that you had to prove a point? Was your mindset going in like I need to do well here at Sheffield United to prove that they were wrong for letting me go? Did that kind of come into your mind?
Yeah, I think there's always an element of that. Again, I was fortunate that it was a manager that I'd played for before that knew my strengths. I actually scored the goal that got us into the playoffs and kept Blues out the playoffs away at Tranmere in the last minute that season for Sheffield. Or it kept Blues out the playoffs. I can't remember which way around it was, but I know it was about the 87th minute and I've nicked one at Tranmere. So, yeah, you always want to go and hit the ground run. I think it must be difficult. I was fortunate, really. Most of the clubs only had 5. The main places that I went, I always sort of did well quite soon. It wasn't a case of going in and he struggled. So I think that's always difficult if you go somewhere and you have a bad start. I think I was always very lucky with the type of player that I was. fans, touch wood, always seem to take to me. So again, that's massive. If you can get the supporters on your side from day one, that's a huge thing. But yeah, I mean, wherever I went, I always felt that I had to prove myself. I was never complacent, and I think people ask me what the biggest achievement in my career is, and without doubt, the biggest achievement in my career is the 14, 15 years I was a pro. I was never out of contract. I was never out of contract looking for a club, which tells me that I was always wanted. So I must have been doing something right to be in contract all the time. And, I've played at the top level, scored 100 goals, played in the Premier League, played international football. But to me, that is still my best achievement. Because I know, lads, listen, I've played with lads, and it's a terrible thing seeing a lad coming to the end of the contract. What am I going to do next? What am I going to do next season? Where am I going to go? What am I going to earn? There's a lot of uncertainty. Again, people don't see that. There's lads that need to pay the mortgage, and you're coming to the end of your deal. You've got a month left, and you've got nothing on the table. So again, that's another worry that that people don't see because they just see Premier League 50, 100 grand a week.
Going back to Birmingham under Steve Bruce, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that you played under Steve Bruce, and now you're going into an environment where he's a manager. How was that in terms of adapting to Steve as maybe a friend, and then all of a sudden he's leading you into playoffs and into the Premier League, etc.?
Well, it was actually before that, because Bruce's first job in management was Sheffield. So he came to Sheffield.
Okay.
He came to Sheffield. I think he was 40 as player manager. Now I'd had 18 months with Brucey at Blues. Loved him, proper fella, brilliant player, absolutely amazing player. Far better when he came. I mean, bear in mind he was over the hill when he came to Blues, but he was amazing, honestly, amazing player. And he came as player manager, and he did change. He did change, because obviously you got to separate yourself from, being one of the lads to being the gaffer. But still got on great with him. He came to Sheffield. He only had a year there, unfortunately. Then he went. I think he went to Huddersfield. But yeah, it was brilliant. I remember, again, I got the phone call from Michael. Michael Johnson should have been my agent, really. I got the phone call from Jono. Gaffer's interested, because they'd had a bad run. I think they had won for 10 or 12 games, something mad like that. Would you come back? But I'd just signed a 4-year contract at Sheffield United. Literally just signed a 4-year contract. And I went, well, no, tell her, Bruce was at Palace first of all, and he tapped me up to go to Palace. And they were down in London, they were paying big money. So I went, yeah, I'll go. So I spoke to Neil Warnock. And again, Warnock was great. A lot of managers would have really got the hump about that. He said, right, you'll have to put a transfer request. So I put a transfer request in. So straight away, everyone, it was bad. I'd just signed a 4-year contract. Within 6 months, I put a transfer request in. I went completely about it the wrong way, the way I left Sheffield United. And it's probably the only regret I've got in 15 years. And quite rightly so. The fans got the hump and they started giving me a bit of stick. Quite rightly so. But I made my mind up. I wanted to go there. Then Brucey left to go to Birmingham. So I'm then in limbo. I've put this transfer. I've burnt my bridges here. So he went to Birmingham, got fed back. Yeah, he wants to sign you for Blues. Brilliant. So a week went by, 2 weeks went by, nothing's happening. So I'm starting to panic. So John, I asked Brucey, what's happening? So he said he's evaluated the squad. There's too many in the 30s. Dev, he don't know whether it's right. I was 30 at the time, just 30, maybe 31. I can't remember. He said it might not be the best thing to do. So I'm going, I don't mind. I said, I put a transfer request in. I mean, at the time, Neil Warnock let me train at home. He went, not in a bad way. He wasn't like, I don't want you around the club. He knew I was quite fiery, and if I had my arse in my hands, I could be a bit of a handful. So he went, just keep yourself fit at home. Brilliant. He handled the situation brilliantly, Neil Warnock. So then that got fed back to me. So again, I've rang Neil. I've gone, Gaffer, listen. I said, the move to Blues is off. Great. Come back training. Get your head down. He put me straight back in the team on the Saturday. Norwich on the teller. So I was straight back in the team. I think we went away at Norwich. I mean, that was a difference between how Neil would have handled it and how Trevor would have handled it. Trevor would have just ostracised me, go and train with the kids, no interest. Neil wasn't like that. Yeah, are you all right? Okay, how's everything happening? Okay, that's finished now. You're back in the team. So it was mad. So I went back in the team. We played on the telly. I think it was a Saturday or Sunday away at Norwich. Coming back on the bus, Neil's called me to the front of the bus. I think Blues had been beat again the weekend. He went, get all your stuff. You're going to Blues tomorrow. What the hell are you on about? He said, they got beat again. He said, I've had Steve or David Sullivan on the phone. I can't remember. You're going down tomorrow for a month's loan. He said, it's going to be a loan, and then they're going to sign you. Said, okay, brilliant. So I went down to Blues. Great to see Brucey, and there was still quite a lot of the lads there from when I played. And we went on, I think we went on a 12 or 13 match unbeaten run, sneaked into sixth place in the playoffs, and ended up going up that season. So it was the right move because we ended up getting promoted into the Premier League, and I played in a playoff final and scored in the penalty shootout, which was amazing. Probably one of the best days of my career. But my big regret is the way I went about. Derek Dooley, who was the chairman of Sheffield United at the time, was a fantastic man. Neil was brilliant. I'd had a fantastic rapport with the Sheffield United fans, and I probably didn't go about it in the right way. But ultimately, it proved to be the right move.
You mentioned obviously that the run that Blues went on to get into the playoffs and then eventually winning the playoffs. Was there anything that stands out in the dressing room in terms of mentality and maybe with senior members and obviously younger members? Darren Carter, you mentioned the penalty shootout. Was there anything that kind of stands out on why that was successful during that period?
They had a team of men. Again, they had a team that could play, but they had a team. If you wanted to mix it and you wanted to have a fight and you wanted to have a scrap, Martin Granger, Darren Purse, Jeff Kenner, Steve Vickers, Jeff Horsfield, Martin O'Connor, Stern John, all lads that would dig a little bit, but they could play as well. There was a fantastic team spirit. And again, if you remember, I think for the 3 years previous to that, Blues had got to the playoffs. If I remember, it was like Watford, Bolton, Barnsley, or Preston, and they'd lost in the playoffs. Trevor couldn't quite get them over the line. And then obviously Brucey came in and he instilled that team ethic. His teams played as he was as a player, Brucey. Very tough, no nonsense. He really fostered the team spirit. He loved that, lads. You win together, you socialise together, you lose together. He fostered that sort of thing, and he liked a certain type of player. And they were all good lads. They were all really, really. I mean, I'm still pally with Jeff Horsfield yesterday. So yeah, they had this desire, and they could do both. They could play, and they had the physical side of it, boxed off as well.
Were you involved in the Millwall game when Stern John scored in the last minute?
Played in the Millwall in the semi-final. That was great. I think, if I remember rightly, we drew up here. I think we drew, and then we beat them 1-0 down there. But that was amazing. The thing that sticks out in my mind, and I've spoke about this loads, is that we couldn't get off the pitch till sort of 1:30. There was riots outside the ground. It was like being in a war zone. And I just remember we're on the pitch, and the chairman of Millwall at the time was Theo Pathetis, and he's come down with a couple of waiters and crates of lager. So brilliant, fair play to him. We're all drinking on the pitch, and we've got out at 1:30, and they still managed to put the windows through on the bus. The Millwall fans on the way back. Lucky enough, it's those great big double glazed ones. So the first one's got smashed. But yeah, I just remember it being a really tough game. And Stern, and I think if you look at Stern and Horse, they weren't prolific goal scorers, 25, 30 a season. But what they did do, they both scored really important goals at the right time. Yeah. So yeah, remember it really well. The helicopters in the sky. It's like being in a war zone, but two really tough games.
Was there a sense of relief, obviously, winning that cup final or the playoff cup final against Norwich, in terms of being a Birmingham City fan and the club gets to the Premier League and it's maybe a club that you supported growing up, and there's a sense of relief of like, actually, I've contributed to the success or the recent success of the team that I love. But what was the feeling like there going into that final as well as kind of winning it?
We'd been 16 years out the top flight. It was an amazing stadium, the Millennium. The colours, the green and yellow, the blue and white just made it brilliant. I remember, I think they had the roof on that day as well, which was the first time they had a roof on, so it was roasted. Yeah. So, it meant the world. It was, in that game, walking up to take the penalty was probably one of the worst and the best experiences of my life. Rolled into one. Obviously, we go through the game again. Horse gets us back in it, 1-1. And I just remember I'm looking at grown men and they've got their head in their hands and they're crying. Brucey couldn't watch the penalties. Really emotional. I just remember walking up to that penalty and you're walking from the centre spot to the penalty spot. And all these, you got to think positive, do that. And all that was going through my mind is people are going to remember you forever as the Birmingham fan that missed. If you missed this, they're going to remember you forever as you missed it. And that was all that was going through my mind. But I was always a penalty taker, and I'd always done quite well. And we'd practiced them religiously for weeks before. Not that makes any difference when you're in the atmosphere that you're in. So I'd had cramp because obviously I played the game and the extra time, and I always used to have a long run up for my penalties. One of my pet hates is these stupid run ups that players do now. And I remember thinking, I can't have my normal run up because my calves are going to cramp before I get to the ball. So I shortened my run up by a few yards. Obviously, took the penalty, took a good penalty, and it went in. So I've just sort of, if ever you see I've just done that because I was that tired and that emotional. I mean, I could have quite easily cried after it went in. And to see it go in was brilliant. Obviously, they missed a couple, and then you got Daz. It was a fairy tale when Daz Carter broke into the team that season. Scored the winning goal. Brian Hughes is gutted because he took the glory off Hughes because I think Hughes was down to take the fifth penalty. And it was amazing. I just remember the scenes after. Don't remember too much about the 3 or 4 days after because that was one long party, let me tell you. And it was brilliant. Yeah, it was great. 16 years out the top flight. I think if you ask any player, if you can guarantee to win a playoff final, it's better than actually winning the league because you've got the day out, the occasion, and it's like playing in, a big FA Cup final or something like that. And it was just great to, the open top bus parade in Birmingham because we'd lived in Villa Shadow for, 16, 17, forever really. And to have that little bit of the moment in the sun was fantastic.
Obviously, Rob Green was in goal as well, so a good goalkeeper to beat in that penalty shootout.
Well, it was funny because Rob Green was in goal, England goalie, and then my first goal for Blues in the Premiership, and it was Blues' first ever Premiership goal, first one ever at St Andrews against Leeds, was against Paul Robinson. So to score against 2 England keepers in such important games, and we beat them as well. We got our first win, was great. But yeah, it was. Yeah. I mean, we had some good penalty takers. To be fair, I was quite confident when it went to penalties because although we'd practiced them, sort of replicating that walk in front of 75,000 people and the pressure, you can't do it. But the lads that took them were all quite strong characters, and then obviously I think Darren being 18. I think a lot of it went over his head, the importance of it. He'd never seen Blues in the top division and blah, blah, blah. So I think it was good that he just walked up and took his normal penalty without thinking about it.
Playing in the Premier League then, Paul, you mentioned kind of that Leeds game and winning at St Andrews and that feeling. What was the feeling like going into the Premier League, and also as well, kind of from a professional point of view? You mentioned you like a drink and the social aspect. Was there an element of you had to change because you're stepping up to the elite level of football as a whole? Was there anything that stands out there?
No, not really.
No.
Not really. I always felt it was a bit of a myth when people used to say, "Oh, the Premiership's that faster than the pace." I thought it was slower. I thought the Premier League was slower than the Championship for the simple reason is the players were better. So they didn't have to rely on running around, smashing people and being 100 mile an hour. So I always felt that being, it's this quick, it's a quickish league. I always felt it was a myth. I always felt the lower down the levels you played, the more physical it was because the players technically weren't as good. So, no, Brucey was great because what the worry is, you think, right, we've got us up to the Premier League. The club have now got 150 million. Is he going to keep me? And he gave probably all the lads who got him up, gave us all a chance. And I think that's where it worked really well. His first few signings in the Premier League, the likes of Matty Upson, Kenny Cunningham, people like that. We had Christoph Dugarry come in. They all come in and did really well and added to what we got. And we ended up stopping up comfortably. I think West Ham actually went down that season with I think 40 or 42 points. When you get 40, 42 points now, you're stopping up comfortable. And we'd done the double over the Villa, which was again unbelievable to be involved in those games. But no, I didn't think it wasn't a case of, right, we've got to get any fitter. Obviously, you're playing against better players, whereas in a game in the Championship, you might get 2 or 3 chances to score in a game. You might only get one in the Premier League, and again, you might get a Championship centre forward, miss a couple of chances. Alan Shearer gets a chance, Michael Owen gets a chance. 9 times out of 10 they score. So it was more clinical at both ends of the pitch, but physically, I didn't think it was any. If anything, I thought it was a little bit easier physically.
You mentioned the players that came into the environment, Cunningham, Upson, obviously as well, Dougarry.
Yeah.
What was different? What did they bring in terms of keeping Blues into the league and adding to the team that you already had? Was there anything that stands out? Obviously, Christoph is a legend in terms of what he's achieved within the game. But what was it that they brought? Was it something around maybe their physical or technical or mental performance? I'm just intrigued on
I
what
think
they
all
might
of
have
it. I think
developed.
all of it. He brought in Kenny Cunningham. Now, if you stand next to Kenny and you think, well, he's not that big, he's not that strong, he's not quick, but just read the game unbelievable, Kenny. And I think what complemented him was having Matty Upson, who was 6'2", left footer, brilliant in the air, rapid. I just think that the players that he brought in complemented what we already had there, and they were all good lads. They all, even look, I mean, Christoph Dougarry shows up thinking, God, we've got a World Cup winner, European Championship winner, and he comes in and he's great. One of the coolest lads you'll ever meet. I mean, you see him in training, and then I think what that does when you're bringing in those players. Obviously, Matty had come from Arsenal, Kenny had come from Wimbledon, that they'd played at top level. It ups everything in training because you think, hang on, I'm training with Christoph Dougarry here. I don't want him to think I'm a mug. So it ups everyone else's standards, and again that makes you a better player. Obviously, they're adding quality, they're adding experience at that top level to the team, and I just think it brings everyone else along.
Yeah. Well, in terms of obviously playing in the Premier League and then internationally,
Mm-hmm.
Scotland, how did that come about in terms of representing Scotland? You mentioned earlier that your father was a Celtic fan, so I
Yeah,
presume there's some
yeah,
Scottish
yeah.
connection there, yeah?
My dad's from a place called Coatbridge, and all my dad's side of the family are still up there. So it was a real close connection. Or every school holiday when I was a kid, I was up there. So it wasn't like a long distant great grandparent. I'd spent loads of time up there. There'd been rumours down the years when I was at Blues the first time, and I was at Sheffield, that I was going to get a call up, and it never quite happened. I remember speaking to Mick McCarthy before he announced his first Republic of Ireland squad the first time round, and he wanted me in that squad. But unfortunately, FIFA had changed the rules that year that you used to be able to go back as far as your great grandparents, which means I could have qualified for the Republic of Ireland, but they changed it to your grandparents, so I couldn't. So I had to wait sort of 10 years then to get a call up for Scotland. But it was so strange. We were playing Newcastle at St Andrews, and I don't know we either drew or we won, but I played quite well that a real horrible winter's day. Played well, and my dad in a stadium that holds 28,500 for some reason was actually sat behind Archie Knox, who was sent down to watch me. So my dad's literally, I mean, how's this for luck? Sitting behind him, listening to him on the phone, reporting back to whoever at the, yeah, he's done well, yeah, he's worth a shout. So my dad knew I was going to get a call up before I even knew. So then I got the, I don't know which way around. I think you get a letter. A letter comes to the club. Brucey had me in, congratulations. Then Bertie Vogts rang me. So, if I'm being perfectly honest, it probably all came a little bit too late. I was sort of into my 30s then. It was great to get it was brilliant to, to get an international cap and get 10 caps. Unfortunately, never got a goal, but it was amazing, and I played in a couple of big games. I played against Germany at Hampden, involved in the Holland game, played away against Portugal, against Figo and people like that. So it was an amazing achievement, really, when I think back. Not so long ago, I was a chef in Erdington playing Sunday football. So it was great.
You mentioned your dad being a Celtic fan.
Yeah,
Did you ever think to yourself, maybe one day could I ever
I'd have loved
play in
to.
that? Would that would
I'd
have
have,
been a dream in some
yeah,
regard?
it would have been a massive dream. It would have been a huge thing in my career. I never got the chance. But the only thing is, I know it had probably caused my mum and dad to be divorced because the old man would have moved back to Scotland and left her in Birmingham. But yeah, I'd have walked to Glasgow to get the chance to play for Celtic.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, coming towards the end of your career, Watford, Walsall. Just on reflection of your whole career, Paul, is there anything that stands out in terms of what your proudest moment is?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I talk about the fact of never being out of contract. I think the playoff final was amazing. I think there's probably three really that are difficult to separate. Making my international debut was great. The playoff final and making my debut as a pro. They're the three. I think if you look at level of importance, I think the playoff final was with what it meant to the club, with scoring a penalty in the playoff final, and then that's probably the standout one. But I was fortunate, really, and I had 14, 15 years. Never really, touch wood, had a bad injury. Made over 500 appearances, scored over 100 goals, played at every level. So, it was fantastic. I had a couple of unfortunate things. Down at Watford, I had 3 years there, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I was a bit over the hill when I went to Watford. So Watford never saw the great club, by the way. Watford never saw the best of me, which was unfortunate. But great club, and Ray Lewington, Adi Boothroyd, fantastic managers. Always a good sort of story piece is that Elton John paid for my contract down there, which was great. So I used to take a bit of stick about that, to be honest. But no, it was. I can't mind when I look back. I went to Warsaw. I made the wrong decision. I wanted to come back to the Midlands. I'd had offers to stay down south at MK Dons and Gillingham, who were offering me 3-year contracts at the time. I think I was 33, 34.
Wow.
But I wanted to get back to the Midlands, obviously for family, different reasons, and it was the wrong decision. I'd had an operation on my toe, the only operation I had. I dropped down the levels. I just wasn't enjoying it at the time. But looking back now, I probably should have stayed down south and played another 2 or 3 years.
Mm.
That's hindsight.
Final question, and this what I normally tend to do is get my guests to either look back and forth in terms of their career, but I think
Mm-hmm.
due to the nature of our conversation, we've kind of already done that a little bit in terms of reflecting back on your career. So I'm going to change it up a little bit, Paul. I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you, for those that might be listening or watching, they might be inspiring to be a football player or have a career within sport. What advice would you give to an individual that wants to maybe become a professional footballer or professional athlete or have
Yeah.
a career within a footballing environment? Is there anything that you would like to maybe share with your
Yeah.
experiences that might be useful?
I think you've got to be dedicated. I mean, we've touched on it. We've had a laugh about the fact that myself and other players used to like and have a beer and that, but I was always really, really dedicated to staying fit. I still keep in shape. I'm 51 now. I still keep in shape. I'm religious about my training routine. So first and foremost, you've got to keep yourself at your peak physically. You're going to have a lot of setbacks along the way. You're going to have a lot of people saying no to you, and you've got to have a determination to believe in your ability. And follow it through. I think just touching on the football aspect of it now, and we touched on it briefly earlier on. I think if you're a kid with aspirations of playing football, don't be obsessed with getting into these academies at a young age. And I think parents are a lot to blame there. They sort of look at a lot of their children as sort of the lottery win down the line. I know that sounds terrible, but they do because I've seen it. And just believe in yourself. Just because you're not at a club or you're not where you want to be at 16, 17, 18, whatever, doesn't mean you're not going to get there. Jeff Horsfield signed pro at 24. Ian Wright late on in life, for a footballer. Stuart Pearce, I was 19, never in an academy, never doing good enough. 100 goals, 500 games. So don't let people tell you no.
Love that, Paul. And for those, like I said, for those listening or watching, where can they find you? Like, are you on social media? Do you
Yeah,
engage with that?
I'm on Twitter at Devo72D. I think it is. I'm on Facebook, places like that, and I'm working for O'Neill and Brennan. So if anyone needs any labourers, let me know. So you can get me there.
We'll put the links to your social media as well as obviously your
Yeah,
employment in the description. So if anyone is interested in that, they can go and check that out.
brilliant.
From a personal point of view, Paul, I just want to say thank you. Being a Birmingham fan, and you
Yeah,
mentioned the playoffs and playing in the Premier League. My early years supporting Blues, that
yeah,
was kind of very much inspired me to kind of have a career within sport. So just want to say
brilliant.
thank you and thank you for your time.
No, thanks for having me, mate. Loved it.
Cheers.